Hey everybody, Dan Ward here, and in today's video, I want to talk about the I word, innovation. Now, innovation is one of those words that gets used way more often than it gets defined. So I always try to be really clear about what I mean when I say that word. The definition I use is novelty with impact. I've got a whole other video that unpacks those three words in a lot more detail. So that's not what we're going to do today. Instead, in this video, I want to admit that even though I've been using this definition for a couple years now, it only recently occurred to me that we could graph this out. Now, if you've seen Dead Poet Society, and I hope you have, it's a pretty good movie. Don't worry, we're not going to take the Dr. J. Evans Pritchard PhD approach. We're not going to use this to graph out and calculate the measure of an innovation's greatness. Okay, to quote Robin Williams' character in that scene, excrement. So instead, we're going to do something that's a lot more interesting and hopefully a lot more useful. Okay, now bear with me for a moment because we do need to define our axes. So I put novelty on the y-axis. So the low end of novelty is stuff that's kind of familiar, and the high end is stuff that's utterly unique, never seen it before. Of course, context matters. So stuff that you find familiar might sound strange to me, and things that are common in one domain might be unheard of in other places. So the point is just that there is a spectrum of novelty from low to high, and it probably varies from place to place and time to time. The same goes for impact. That's on the x-axis here. So impact ranges from kind of helpful to wow, saved the world. And of course, something that's kind of helpful to one person could save someone else's life. So different people at different times and in different situations will find that different things have different levels of impact. That's one of the reasons we aren't going to graph it like in that scene in Dead Poets. And seriously, if you haven't seen that movie, check it out. It's worth watching. Okay, so the boring application of this graph, the J. Evans Pritchard PhD style analysis, will lead us to conclude that something low in novelty and impact is a minor innovation. And then in the upper right corner, we have the major innovations. Say it with me, folks, excrement. The interesting stuff happens in the other two quadrants, in the upper left and the lower right, in the transition from one to the other, because one of the main things I want to emphasize is that novelty and impact are not static attributes. They both change over time. So early innovations often pop up in this upper left area. These are new, they're often unfamiliar, and they typically operate on a small scale. The impact on an individual user, an individual customer or buyer or an early adopter might be huge, but the impact on the world tends to be relatively low because early adopters are generally a small group. So, for example, when the iPod came out in 2001, nobody had ever seen anything quite like it. Okay, its novelty was off the charts. And for the small group of people who got one for Christmas that year, yeah, it totally changed the game on how they bought music and how they listened to music. But Apple only sold 125,000 of them in their first quarter. They didn't make a ton of money at first, and the overall impact on the market for the first year or two was actually pretty limited because not a lot of people had one. Okay, now fast forward to 2005. In that year, Apple was selling about 20 million iPods every year. Seemed like everybody had one, or at least everybody had seen one or knew someone who had one. So now, not only was Apple making a ton of money, so big impact on the company, they were also changing how music is distributed, how musicians get paid, how we manage intellectual property. The iPod was having an impact on people who didn't even own an iPod. Look, if your product is fundamentally restructuring the marketplace and it's having an impact on people who aren't even your customers, that's some major impact. But something interesting was happening on that other axis at the same time. As the iPod became more familiar, it became more impactful and less novel. You know, in general, as more people hear about a thing, as more people use or own the thing, the thing becomes less novel. Okay, so popularity and familiarity decrease novelty. And here's what feels so interesting about this to me. Movement in this direction, down and to the right, can feel like failure to an innovator. And it can look like failure to a critic. So when we as innovators introduce something new to the world, we often take pride. We take great pride in the newness of the thing, and we should. But if we do it right, and if we get lucky, and if this new thing becomes popular and wildly adopted, and if it moves down and to the right, that loss of novelty can feel like we're doing something wrong. So by 2005, people were writing articles about how Apple is losing their magic, about how they're not being innovative because the iPod isn't novel anymore, even while its impact was still growing. So that sort of raises the question of, why do we do innovation in the first place? Do we do it to introduce novelty or to have an impact? I'd like to suggest that impact is the point. Okay, the whole reason we do innovation in the first place is to make a difference, to solve a problem, to create some value, to help people. And making a big difference, creating a lot of value, helping a lot of people, moving down and to the right, well, that can be a sign of success, not failure. It doesn't have to mean that you've lost your magic. It might mean the magic is working. So another way to think of this is in terms of boutiques and franchises. Okay, boutiques are in the upper left corner. The best boutiques are one of a kind, and they tend to have a unique personality and a limited capacity, which can be part of their charm. Then franchises are in the lower right-hand corner. Those are copies. They replicate, they duplicate. So if you walk into a chain store, you know what to expect. It is familiar, not novel. But franchises have a larger potential impact because their capacity is larger. They can do more things for more people. So, I think it's important to recognize and to understand that some people's interests and personalities and skills are just a better fit for boutique applications than for franchises. Great, wonderful. And for other folks, it's the opposite. The franchise model is their jam. Also great, also wonderful. So the key for us as innovators is to recognize where we want to be and where we don't want to be. Because misalignment between our skills and interests and our environment, that can be really frustrating, and it can make us less likely to do the work well. Another way to think about these areas are upscale and scaled up. Okay, nothing wrong with either one, nothing wrong with having a preference, nothing wrong with being good at one and not the other. But there's something deeply wrong with claiming that only one of these is real innovation, that one of them is good and the other's lame. For every critic who slams something in the lower right-hand corner as not innovative anymore, as losing their magic, there are plenty of critics who dismiss stuff in the upper left corner as not being real innovation because the impact is limited. I tend to think both types of criticism are missing the point. And the point is, whether you're trying to be innovative at an upscale boutique, or trying to be innovative at a scaled up franchise, or you're trying to turn your boutique into a franchise, or you're trying to not let your boutique become a franchise, whatever your situation, it's important to understand the differences between these two equally valid approaches to innovation. It's important to understand our own preferences, our priorities and our skills, and to recognize that for any product or project or organization, novelty and impact will both change over time. So if we're thoughtful about the change, if we're prepared for the change, if we don't let it catch us by surprise, then we can make thoughtful decisions about where we want to be and how we can do our best work. Thanks for watching.